I am angry, and you're probably angry too. And I don't even really know where to start. Probably goes without saying at this point, but we're in the middle of what feels like a total fucking political shitstorm. And a lot of us are worried, worried being the biggest understatement of a word you could possibly use, about how we're going to weather it. Here in Scotland and the UK, we can't exactly match the god-awful combination of evil and incompetence that is the Trump regime. But we are also in a time of conflict too. We have Scottish independence, or the lack thereof, we have Brexit, we have a Tory Prime Minister who wasn't elected. And I feel like I've just spent a lot of time watching awful people make awful, greedy, short-sighted decisions. And I guess that started with, the first Scottish referendum, and it's just kind of been increasing in idiocy and cruelty ever since then. Many people, like me, have been spurred into becoming politically active when we weren't before. And we should in no way expect, but we can hope that this kind of rise in right-wing bullshit will energise people to fight harder for what is right in the coming years. For me personally, my entire political knowledge and interest were limited to the West Wing. When I went to school, when we were 12 or 13 or 14, we chose our standard grades, so that would be the subjects that we studied in the next 2 years, and you had to pick one social science, so it had to be modern studies, so that's politics and current affairs, and geography or history. And I chose history, so I haven't learned anything about how our government works or what is happening and how we run ourselves since I was about 12. I'm a smart and critically thinking person who, for most of my life, has been completely politically uninformed. When I was doing my degree, I did study a bit of political philosophy, but this is all about the kind of theoretical underpinnings of governing and not really about how our specific government works at all. That's the context. I've never really been up to date with politics, never really been interested, and now, like a lot of people, I'm fucking raging, and we need to do something about this, and we need to fight for the people who can't. We need to fight this utter bullshit. So I haven't exactly so much as become interested in politics as I have just become incredibly angry that any of us have to do this at all. But I'm here, and I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to inform myself, because I know that is how every fight starts, and that's the only way we're going to get anything done, is by being informed. Everyone knows the saying, information is power, but I think actually a more authentic and useful way of putting it is to say to inform yourself is to empower yourself. I'm going to go over a couple of the ways in which I'm becoming a bit more informed about our situation. And they might seem really obvious to you, but I felt like I had no idea where to start in this. I felt powerless, and I felt like I was behind with everything, and I didn't know if there was any way I could catch up, and I didn't know where to go to learn this. Short of going back to school to study, it felt really inaccessible. And there are obvious places to start, like reading more legitimate news sources, and less sort of like tabloids and magazines and things like that, or relying on Twitter for your knowledge. But I also know that newspapers aren't created equal. They have their own biases. So where the hell do you start if you have no idea what newspaper is what? How do you find anything to trust? So number one, Google everything. This is a quote from the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And it's not specifically about informing yourself politically, but it is about educating yourself. And he said, "School is one thing, education is another. The two don't necessarily overlap. Whether you're in school or not, it's always your job to get an education. Google everything. I mean everything. Google your dreams, Google your problems. Don't ask a question before you Google it. You'll either find the answer or a better question." So what I'm doing is when I'm reading news, I'm making an effort to Google everything I don't understand immediately. So if there's a piece of jargon that I just don't know what it means, immediately go and look it up. Personally, I really hate having a conversation with someone and they use a piece of jargon that I don't understand what it means, and it means that I probably don't even understand the entire sentence they just said, and I'm just too embarrassed to ask them what it is, because it just seems like the kind of thing that everyone is expected to know and understand, and here I am having gotten to 25 and I don't know. I just managed to get by without ever interacting with that pool of knowledge. And even telling you this now, having said, you know, I've grown up very politically uninformed, I'm having to look up things like the basics of how the government is structured. And the other day I looked up the word mandate because I did not know what that meant. I'm a smart person, but we all have gaps in our knowledge, and so the best thing is to immediately go and try and fill that gap. If you're having a conversation like that, if you're brave, you can just ask the person what they mean. That's, you know, in an ideal world, if we were all brave enough to admit our own ignorance, that would be nice. But I think you can also just go to the bathroom and go and Google it. Number 2 is to work on your media literacy. We can't just blindly believe everything we read, especially if we're Googling things. You know, Google just collects everything and not all of it is reliable. So we need to try and look for that reliability and legitimacy before we start spouting off things to other people and before we start internalizing things that they've said. So I hope that you'll join me in looking up how to improve your media literacy and working on it with me. Number 3, get an overview of your local and national newspapers and news sources. I've already done this for UK newspapers, but I want to do it specifically for Scottish newspapers, and I will leave some links down below. But basically, if you want to start reading newspapers, you have no idea where to start and what's a tabloid and what's a broadsheet and which ones are, you know, reliable and, you know, what are their biases, then you want an overview, and obviously you want this overview to be reliable as well and legitimate. But I think that's a good place to start. And then obviously when you're reading them, you will start to pick up, you'll start to understand the differences between them. But when you have no idea where to start, you can't just go out and buy every newspaper there is, because ain't nobody got time for that, and also ain't nobody got money for that. Well, I mean, I'm sure some people do, but I don't. Number 4, pick a few of these newspapers or news sources to read regularly, but not exclusively. Don't just pick 2 newspapers and read those all the time, and don't ever read anything else, but you do want a couple of staples that you can get week to week. I would also recommend subscribing. I haven't figured this out for myself yet, because I think I actually prefer reading paper and print rather than digitally, but maybe you want to subscribe digitally. If you're in the US, like it's a no-brainer that you should just go for the New York Times. But yeah, you want to think a little bit about how you're regularly going to acquire news, newspapers, news sources, whether that will be digital or print. Number 5 is to try and work it into your routine somehow and make it habit. For me personally, I am going to try and for one day off of mine every week, I'm going to get a couple of newspapers and I'm going to read them in the morning. That's going to be my thing. I really like breakfast and reading things, so it just makes sense for those two to go together, but maybe that doesn't work for you, that's fine. But it's definitely the kind of thing you want to get into a habit of. You don't want to just pick up a newspaper every 3 months and try and like overload yourself and catch up on everything that's happened. Number 6, and my last tip, is to collect resources when they appear. So if you find things like the Resistance Manual in the US, link below, or resources for media literacy, or good roundups of things, try and keep those in a specific place that you'll be able to return to them. I'm thinking of making a Trello board for this, but I haven't exactly figured out how I'm going to do this yet. So that's where I've started. And I don't think it's an awful place for you to start either, if you are starting. I'm sure there are a lot of you who aren't. But if you have any advice for me or people like me who would like to fight the assholes who are trying to drag us back to the dark ages by informing ourselves, then please leave some comments below. Whether you're a political baby like me or you're someone well versed in political affairs, it'd be great to hear from you. And if there's enough good chat in the comments, I might even collate that into a blog post or something. I also wanted to share a couple of tweets that people sent me about this that I thought were quite useful. Laurel Reinhardt suggests opensecrets.org or Congress.gov if you're in the US. Richard Gregory suggests Secular Talk, the YouTube channel, which I had a quick look at and seems good as well. I subscribed, so you might want to check that out if you're in the US. Tay says that social media's algorithms often create an echo chamber effect and that you should follow people you disagree with to combat this. This is something that I have heard a lot. I'm not sure if you've heard it a lot, and I'm interested in kind of deeper perspectives on it, because I do see that as a risk. And I mean, especially the things on Facebook about not being able to see posts by people who are politically opposed to you, Obviously that's an issue and it's going to divide us further, and you know, at some point we're not even talking at each other, we're not even talking to each other anymore, we're just kind of talking at each other, and obviously that's an issue. But I'm also interested in where the line is between, you know, giving space to conflicting opinions, to challenge your own, and then giving space to just hate. When are we broadening our horizons and broadening our ideas, and when are we just like opening ourselves up and making ourselves vulnerable to people who just want to hurt us? If anyone wants to shed some light on this, I'd be really interested, because I haven't really figured it out, to be honest. Tay also shares this infographic of US news sources and their biases and where they lean and stuff, which I think is really useful if you're in the US. They also say, I try to read a third of my news from publications which skew away from my positions, so that I can challenge my preconceptions. And lastly, read with a cup of tea or coffee nearby. Tasty and lets you take a sip instead of screaming or weeping because of Trump. Okay, cool. If you have any links for kind of reliable summaries of newspapers and news sources in your area or in your country, please post them below. Make sure to label them for where they are and things, because that'd be really useful, I think, for a lot of people. And if you found this helpful, please share it. I would really appreciate it. And I think other people who might find it helpful would also appreciate it. And if you're new and you like this video, then you should probably subscribe, because we should talk again soon. That might be nice. Okay folks, I'm going to talk to you soon. As always, I'm Rachael Stephen, novelist, YouTuber, woodland hell witch, and yeah, I hope you like this video. Let's all get informed and dismantle our lizard governments. If you have an this is so hard to, oh, you look weird. But if you have what can I say in this sentence? Me, about the comments below. Fuck that up. I was so close. I was so close. The new news, legitimate. No, how do I say this without sounding like a dick? Well, that's one way to sit down.